everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. So today we're going to be looking at, it's a short story. It's called The Old Ant, a story of neglect and redemption.
Oh, yeah. I know this one.
Yeah, and it's by Premchand. Now, Premchand is, if you don't know, he's like a really, really big name in Hindi and Urdu literature.
Huge.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
And basically, he's kind of known as like the voice of...
Early 1900s.
Yeah, like the social commentator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of the time.
For India.
So for India.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a really interesting one. We're going to be looking at themes of aging family dynamics and kind of the consequences of what happens when we neglect our elders.
And, you know, it's interesting how he just pulls you right in, right away to the characters' lives.
Right.
So we have Boodhi Kaki. She's the old aunt who's at the center of the story.
Right.
And then her nephew, Budaram, and his wife, Sundari. They're supposed to be taking care of her. But
And then there's also their youngest daughter, Laudley, who adds this really interesting dynamic.
yeah, we're going to definitely talk about Laudley a little bit later. But let's first kind of paint a picture of what Boodhi Kaki's life is actually like. Because Premchand really doesn't make it, like, pretty at all. She's physically frail, she's completely reliant on others, and she's actually prone to all of these emotional outbursts that are really heartbreaking.
Yeah, you know, and it just makes you think about how a lot of elderly people really experience this. Like that vulnerability and the isolation that comes along with that as you age is just a really powerful statement right from the beginning.
Yeah, and then you added how her family is actually treating her, because we learn that Budaram, her nephew, he actually inherited everything from her after her husband died and her son died. So all of her property, her livelihood, everything went to him. But there's this, like, resentment almost.
It makes you think about, like, is he obligated or is he really resentful?
Yeah.
You know, I think he's wrestling with some guilt. But then also this idea that the kinder he is to her, the more she's going to demand of him.
Right.
You know, it's like this harsh reality that this fear can really, like, warp the relationships.
And there's this one line that really stuck out to me where it said, if a respectable guest was sitting in the house and the old aunt started wailing, Budaram would get angry and scold her loudly. So it's almost like her needs are just an inconvenience rather than something to be met with compassion.
Right, and I think about that in the context of, you know, society at the time and how important it was to, you know, appear respectable, and how sometimes appearing respectable kind of took the place of actually caring for someone.
Right, yeah. And it makes me think about today, like how often do we maybe prioritize appearances over true empathy?
Definitely.
So we talked about Laudley earlier, Budaram's daughter, and she really is like a stark contrast to the rest of the family. She's really the only one who shows her any genuine affection. She even goes so far as to share her snacks with her in secret.
Yeah, that part about the snacks really stood out to me. It's so interesting because on one hand, you have this really sweet gesture of kindness from this little girl.
Right.
But Premchand adds this other layer where it's like she's also doing it to protect her snacks from her brothers.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, like, even with the best intentions, maybe there are other things at play.
Yeah, is it really altruistic, or is there an element of self-preservation?
Exactly.
It's fascinating how he, like, adds these questions into the story.
Yeah, and it really adds this, like, depth to how the family is, like, relating to one another.
Yeah.
You know, you have Budaram, who's dealing with his guilt. You have Sundari, who is really afraid of, like, divine retribution.
Right.
And then Laudley, who is trying to figure out how to navigate all of this as a child.
Right. And then the story kind of takes this dramatic turn during this huge celebratory feast for Budaram's son's engagement.
Oh, yeah.
So it's supposed to be this, like, really happy time of abundance and joy. But for Boodhi Kaki, it's just a reminder of how much she's actually lacking.
Right.
Like, she's literally surrounded by all this food, but she's being completely ignored.
Yeah.
And I felt that, like, hunger with her. Reading that.
Yeah, and it's so symbolic because you have this feast, which is supposed to be like a celebration of new beginnings, but it really just highlights how isolated she is.
Right.
And it makes you think about who benefits from these traditions and who's left behind in the process.
Yeah.
You know, as people are trying to advance socially.
Absolutely. Yeah. So she's completely desperate at this point. And it's like she's so desperate for any kind of food that she actually crawls to the kitchen just hoping for like scraps or something.
Oh, wow.
And she ends up getting scolded and sent back to her room.
That's awesome.
It's like a physical manifestation of how powerless she is.
Yeah, it really is like the culmination of all this neglect that she's been experiencing. And I think for Sunbury, Boodram's wife, it's this turning point for her. She actually starts to change her behavior.
Yeah, like seeing Boodhi Kaki resort to scavenging for food, it finally triggers like this remorse in Sundari. And so she rushes to make Boodhi Kaki an actual meal and asks for forgiveness.
It's a big moment. But it makes you wonder, is this really genuine remorse? Or is it just because she was basically caught, mistreating her bat?
Right. It's almost like, is she really changing or is she just trying to alleviate her own guilt?
Right. And then the way that Boodhi Kaki reacts is interesting too, because she just accepts the food. With this, childlike innocence, it's almost as if she's forgotten years of neglect.
It's both heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. Like, wow, she's so resilient, but also she's so vulnerable.
Yeah, Premchand really doesn't make it easy. He leaves us with all these questions about what real forgiveness looks like, and redemption, and the complexities of people in general.
So when we kind of zoom out a little bit, what are some of the bigger themes that you see that Premchand is exploring here?
Well, I think on one level, this story is really a commentary on how we as a society treat our elders. I mean, Boodhi Kaki's situation is like a really clear reminder of the challenges that come with aging, especially when you're reliant on other people to take care of you.
Yeah, and that's such a universal thing. Like, this isn't just a story about India. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
every culture
Everywhere.
has to deal with this. Like, how do we actually care for our elders with dignity when society kind of seems to value individual achievement above all else?
It's like this constant tension between what we want to achieve and our responsibilities to our families.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Premchand is really making us think about our own priorities.
Yeah.
Do we really value our elders, or are they just burdens?
And the way he portrays the family dynamics is so interesting, too. Like, Boodram is obviously struggling with guilt and his own self-interest. And then Sundari's harshness is rooted in this fear of, design punishment. And even Lodley's kindness, which comes from a good place. It's kind of tied up with self-preservation, too.
Right.
It just shows how complicated families can be.
Absolutely. It's not always this picture-perfect ideal
Right.
of love and support.
Right.
It could be like a battleground where everyone's kind of struggling for power and trying to get their own needs met.
Right.
But even within that, there's still the possibility for forgiveness and love.
Another thing I noticed was how much Premchand focuses on food.
Okay.
Throughout the whole story, from Boodhi Kaki's constant hunger to that huge feast where she completely denied food. It's almost like it represents
Yeah.
both her basic needs and also how unequal the family dynamic really is.
Yeah, it's such a powerful metaphor, because food is about basic survival, but it's also about celebration and community. And in this case, it really shows how Boodhi Kaki is being excluded.
Yeah, and so when we get to the end and Sundari's trying to make amends, do you think there's actually any hope for a real change? Or is it just too little too late at that point?
That's the thing about Premchand. He doesn't really give us a clear answer. I mean, we see Sundari's remorse, but we don't know if it's going to stick. He wants us to think about it. Is this really a turning point for her? Or is she just feeling guilty?
Right. And I think it would be so easy to judge these characters,
Right.
to say they're good or bad.
Totally.
But Premchand doesn't let us do that. He
Yeah.
forces us to see the nuances
Yeah.
and how complicated these situations really are.
And how they're just real people. We all have flaws and we all make mistakes.
And that's what makes the story so powerful. It's a reminder that there are no easy answers when it comes to family or societal expectations or taking care of our elders.
We have to keep thinking about these things, both as individuals and as a society.
Absolutely. It's so easy to just get caught up in our own lives and not even realize what the people around us might be going through, especially older people,
Yeah.
This story really kind of made me think about my own relationships with the older people in my life.
I think that's one of the most important things about this story. It's not just about this one family in India. It's about how we all, as a society, think about aging.
Yeah, and it's not even just about providing care, it's about respect and dignity. Like, do we really value getting older? Or is it something we're afraid of?
That's a great question. And Premchand really forces us to confront that.
Yeah, and he does it in such a subtle way. Like, he's not preaching or anything. He just tells the story and lets the characters speak for themselves.
Right. Even Boodram, who seems like the bad guy at first.
Right.
We see that he's actually struggling with his own guilt and fear, just like a real person would.
Yeah, and that makes it so much more powerful because we realize that these issues aren't black and white.
There are no easy answers.
Exactly.
It's all about navigating the complexities of family and society.
So to kind of wrap things up, I think what I really took away from this is that we have to be more mindful of how we treat our elders and how we create a world where they feel valued and respected.
I completely agree. And I think a good question for all of us to consider is, what does a society look like that actually supports its aging population? You know, where their needs are met and their contributions are appreciated.
That's a great question. And it's something we should all be thinking about. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the old ant. It's been a really fascinating conversation.
Yes, it has.
And we hope you'll continue to think about these questions, even after the episode is over.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.